The whispering background. I never liked the word noise. We use it as a trash bin for everything we don't understand. Thermal fluctuations, instrumental artifacts, foreground contamination, the chaotic hiss of the universe between the melodies we care about. But if you listen long enough, noise starts to sound like a language you've almost forgotten. My name is Dr. Lena Ainsworth, Senior Researcher at the Halley Array for Cosmological Horizons, HACH, pronounced like a cough. We sit high in the Atacama Desert, above most of the weather and almost all of the people, a forest of white dishes pointed at the oldest light in existence, the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang, the fossil light of everything. Most nights, it's just patterns, Gaussian fluctuations, anisotropies smoothed and catalogued, power spectra plotted until the lines blur in your vision. This is what I trained for, what I thought my life would be, measuring the static of creation and squeezing out a few more decimal places on constants that most people don't even know exist. I was okay with that, until the static started talking back. The night it began, the sky was so clear it felt brittle. You stepped outside and saw the Milky Way as a spilled river of stars, and it made you walk quieter, as if noise could crack it. I was alone in the main control room, except for the servers humming behind the glass and the cheap coffee going cold on my desk. The others were asleep or pretending to be, huddled in the prefabs further down the slope. Shift work eats at you in ways that don't show up on any medical chart. On my screen, a patch of sky barely wider than your fingernail at arm's length. Ra 23H58M, deck plus 89 degrees, almost straight up toward the north celestial pole, grazing the outer edge of the Planck satellite's deep field. A quiet patch. We chose it for exactly that reason. No bright galaxies, no nearby clusters, almost no foreground dust, just the faint 2.7 Kelvin whisper of the cosmic microwave background, rippled by density fluctuations older than any star. I watched the data accumulate in real time, tiny brightness fluctuations, measured in microkelvin, filling in a grayscale heat map pixel by pixel. The same thing I'd done 1,000 times. I should have been bored. Instead, I found myself staring at a pattern that wasn't supposed to be there. At first I thought it was the fatigue talking. The human brain is a pattern machine. Give it static, and it will give you faces, animals, saints in toast. I'd sat through enough skeptical seminars to know better than to trust a first impression. But the longer I looked at the forming map, the worse the tightness in my chest became. The bright and dark blotches weren't just random. They weren't just the usual clumps and voids we saw everywhere else. They were aligning. I zoomed in, rescaled, adjusted the color map from gray to false color, then back again. My hand hovered over the keyboard as the patch of sky sharpened, the fluctuations resolving into something that made my scalp prickle. There across the center of the frame in blocky, almost crude strokes of brightness, the pattern formed 3 shapes. 3 letters. I didn't want to read them. My eyes did it anyway. I am. I swallowed. The room felt suddenly airless. Just chance, I muttered under my breath as if saying it aloud would make it more true. 3 letters out of 26, pareidolia, nothing more. I checked the logs. The calibration looked fine. The time stamps lined up. No unusual interference flagged, no solar activity spikes, no nearby devices transmitting in our band. I ran a quick Fourier analysis. The spatial frequencies were odd. Too much power concentrated in patterns that looked, statistically, like someone had sketched over the noise with a ruler. But that was still within the realm of weird but possible. I told myself I'd sleep on it, that I'd come back tomorrow, reprocess the data with a clear head, and laugh at myself for getting spooked by a coincidence. Then the next frame wrote itself onto the screen. The telescope had nudged slightly as per schedule, shifting the field by a fraction of a degree to start building a mosaic. New data trickled in, pixels updated. The three letters grew. A fourth shape bloomed at the edge of the map, bright against the background. Then a fifth. A gap. Then four more. HERE. Now the message stretched across the patch, jagged and imperfect but unmistakable. I am here. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and hit the floor, lukewarm liquid spreading in a dark fan. I didn't move. The microwave background is a nearly uniform radiation field from every direction in the sky. It does not rearrange itself into English. It does not spell messages. It does not care where we point our dishes. And yet, I am here. The servers hummed softly behind the glass, as if waiting for my reaction. I saved the frame. Then I saved it again under a different file name as if duplication could make it more real. I ran the standard suite of diagnostic scripts, no anomalies, instrument temperatures stable, the cryogenics had not glitched, no cosmic ray hits were flagged in the relevant feed horns. I printed the map and pinned it up on the corkboard beside my desk, where earlier I'd tacked equations and to-do lists. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Noise, I told myself, just noise. But the universe, for the first time in my life, looked back. By morning, I'd convinced myself not to tell anyone. How do you bring that up at breakfast anyway? Hey, did the microwave background ever tell you it exists? It sounded insane, even in my own head. So I kept quiet. I went through the routine, cold shower, hotter coffee, a brief walk outside to remind my circadian rhythm that the sun still existed. The desert stretched out in all directions, harsh and clean, no distractions except the facility and the sky. The others trickled into the control building over the next couple of hours. Tom Alvarez, our instrumentalist, grumbling about a stiff knee. Ji-Won Park, the data analyst, already on her second energy drink. Professor Emeritus James Hargreaves, who refused to retire and insisted on overseeing his array until it killed him. Lena, you look like hell, Tom said, dropping into the chair opposite mine. You sleep at all? Define sleep, I said. He chuckled, then frowned at the crumpled paper on my corkboard. What's that? I opened my mouth to say just a test frame, something dismissive, something that would postpone the inevitable. Instead, the truth slipped out, quiet and brittle. It's last night's CMB field. He stood, stepped closer, narrowing his eyes. After a moment, his face went still. Oh, he said, oh. Ji-Won drifted over, curiosity pulling her like gravity. Hargreaves followed in their wake, leaning heavily on his cane. The four of us stared at the printout. The room seemed to list around us, as if the center of mass had shifted somewhere just beyond those pixels. Someone's screwing with you, Ji-Won said finally, but there was no conviction in her voice. Tom pointed at the marginalia, the tiny numbers printed alongside the color bar. Same beam pattern as the overnight schedule, same noise characteristics. If this is a joke, someone went to a lot of trouble. Hargreaves didn't say anything at first. He just looked. His pupils were pinpoints in the bright fluorescent light. Reminds me of those religious images people find in tree bark and cloud formations, he said eventually. The Virgin Mary in a grilled cheese sandwich. Our brains are pattern matchers. That's what they do. Show us enough random noise and we'll see a message from God. It's not just the shape, I said. Look at the power spectrum. I brought up the analysis on the main monitor. The usual smooth curve of the CMB anisotropy spectrum had sprouted spikes, narrow and sharp and precisely placed. These are not random fluctuations, I said. There's structure here that shouldn't be. Instrumental artifact, Tom muttered. Some new kind of crosstalk between the feeds, or the ADC, or someone is transmitting in our band, Ji-Won said. Military test, orbiting junk satellites. Except the phase information is wrong for a near-field source, I said. And the sky position, this is right on top of a deep field we've been staring at for decades. Planck, WMAP, all the older surveys. Nothing like this was ever seen before. The air felt thick, like the room was slowly filling with water. Hargreaves sighed. "Repeat the observation," he said. "Different time, different calibration. If it's still there, we'll talk about what impossible thing it might be." We scheduled another deep integration on the same patch for the coming night. In the meantime, we combed through the previous night's data with obsessive thoroughness. We checked for anything that could explain it away. A bug in the pipeline, a misconfigured calibration file, a cosmic ray burst. We found nothing. At some point during the afternoon, I realized that all of us, pragmatic, skeptical scientists, were referring to the pattern the same way, in our thoughts if not out loud. Not as the anomaly, not as the artifact. As the message. The second night, we watched it form together. We crowded into the control room, the glow of the monitors turning our faces pale. Outside, the dishes slewed into position with a slow, majestic inevitability, motors whining softly in the thin air. Data began to flow. The patch of sky, still empty to the naked eye, appeared on the screen as a growing field of noise. At first it was just that, noise, randomness with the faint signature of primordial fluctuations, something comfortingly familiar in its statistical chaos. Then the power spectrum began to shift. Spikes rose, dips deepened. Pixels brightened and dimmed not with the smooth continuum of natural variation, but with a hesitating, stuttering purpose. The structure from the previous night reassembled itself, as if something unimaginably vast were patiently tracing the same shapes again on the fabric of spacetime. I am. No one breathed. The bright patches intensified, the edges sharpened. H-E-R-E. I am here. We watched the universe assert its presence in blocky letters of temperature deviation, measured in millionths of a degree. "This isn't possible," G1 whispered. "Impossible things happen all the time," Hargreaves murmured. "We just call them something else." The telescope continued its slow mosaic, drifting across the field. New pixels filled in. New shapes began to emerge, slanting away from the existing words, expanding the message in a direction we couldn't yet fully see. "You're kidding me," Tom said. "It's adding more." The frame updated, lines sharpened. 4 new words settled into place, written across the fossil light of the cosmos. "In the beginning I slept, but you awakened me with a whisper." I read it once, then again. The words burned into my inner vision even when I closed my eyes. The universe had spoken, and its first complete sentence was a confession. For a little while we kept it to ourselves. Not out of any conspiracy, at least not at first. More like denial, as if saying it aloud to anyone outside that room would solidify the insanity. We told ourselves we needed to be absolutely sure, that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and so on. The slogans of science rattled off like prayers. We reobserved the same patch at different frequencies. The message persisted, re-rendered each time in the language of whatever band we tuned to. We pointed a different set of dishes at the same coordinates. Then another facility's test antenna, half a world away, piped to us through a secure link. Different instruments, different electronics, different local environments. I am here. In the beginning I slept, but you awakened me with a whisper. We checked older data, the Planck satellite sky maps, WMAP, COBE, even the earliest, fuzzier measurements. Nothing. The patch had been ordinary, statistically unremarkable. The anisotropies there had followed the standard model like good little fluctuations, until sometime in the last decade. Somewhere between then and now, The cosmic microwave background had changed. That on its own should have overturned cosmology. The CMB is supposed to be a snapshot, a freeze frame of the early universe, stretched and cooled, but fundamentally static on human timescales. It had been our quietest backdrop, the stillness against which motion was measured. Now it was moving. Maybe it's local, Tom suggested one night, under the harsh fluorescent buzz. Some weird scattering phenomenon in our own galactic halo, a structure we somehow missed before. Local structures can't rewrite the entire spectrum, G1 said, and they can't synchronize a pattern across multiple frequencies and instruments like this. Whatever this is, it's baked into the radiation field itself. Then we're left with two options, Hargreaves said, his voice tired. Either the Big Bang's relic light has decided to spontaneously organize itself into a message, or someone is messing with the universe at a very fundamental level, I finished. We looked at each other, no one laughed. Eventually, the suspicion that we were out of our depth won out. We wrote a preliminary report, stripped of all interpretive language. We called it Anomalous Coherent Structure in the CMB at Ra 23H58M, Dec plus 89 degrees, and buried the phrases I am here and in the beginning I slept, but you awakened me with a whisper deep in the appendix. We sent it up the chain, to the Institute, the funding agencies, the advisory panels. We expected skepticism, derision, requests for clarification. We did not expect men from the government. They arrived 3 days later, in an unmarked black helicopter, whose rotor wash sent dust devils racing across the plateau. We watched from the control room windows as they disembarked. 2 men and 1 woman, all in dark suits that looked absurd in the desert, all wearing expressions of polite calculation. One of them, mid-40s, compact, eyes like cold pinpricks, introduced himself as Mr. Clark. No first name, no agency, just a badge that said he had more clearance than any of us. "Dr. Ainsworth," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that felt carefully calibrated, "we've read your report with great interest. We'd like to take a closer look at your data." "Usually that means an external review committee," I said. "Not," I gestured vaguely at his suit. "This is an unusual situation," he said. That at least was true. We brought them into the control room, showed them the raw data, the calibration files, the reprocessed maps, the message. They said little, took notes, asked precise, unemotional questions. "How many individuals have seen this?" Clark asked, nodding toward the screen where I am here blazed in pseudo-color. "Just us," I said. "The 4 core staff, plus 2 grad students who handled some of the cleaning scripts, and the institute directors who got the report." "Any external dissemination, preprints, emails to colleagues at other facilities?" "No," I said. "We were waiting for someone to tell us we made a mistake." He smiled faintly. It didn't reach his eyes. "We've consulted with several theoretical groups," he said. "Their consensus is that, if your data are correct, this represents a profound change in our understanding of physical law." "That's one way to put it," Tom muttered. Clark ignored him. "Until we know more, this project is now classified," he said. "You are not to share any aspect of these findings with anyone outside your immediate team, including family members, colleagues, or the press. All outgoing communications from this facility will be monitored." "Classified," G1 repeated. "It's the cosmic microwave background. The entire universe can see it." "Perhaps," Clark said, "but not everyone knows what they're looking at. For the time being, it is in humanity's best interest to limit who understands what this message says." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. "You think it's dangerous," I said. It wasn't quite a question. "I think," he said slowly, "that we are dealing with an intelligence or a process that operates on scales and in ways we don't yet comprehend. Until we do, prudence is advisable." Intelligence. No one had said the word aloud yet. It hung in the air like a bad smell. Assume for a moment that it is intentional, Hargreaves said. What do you imagine it is, Mr. Clark? An alien civilization hacking the background, a god finally clearing its throat. Clark looked at the screen for a long moment. The words burned against the color map of ancient light. I don't know, he said, but I suspect we're not at the top of the food chain anymore if we ever were. The dreams started a few nights after that. At first they were just fragments, static that felt too thick, like wading through cold honey, shapes in the noise almost but not quite forming words. I'd wake up with a numb tongue and the taste of ozone in my mouth, heart pounding, the echo of a voice I couldn't remember fading fast. I didn't mention it to anyone. It felt too much like contamination, like letting the anomaly into my personal life. Then G1 came into the control room one morning, eyes rimmed red, clutching a coffee mug like it was a lifeline. I had the stupidest dream, she said, dropping into her chair. I was floating in space and there was this texture to the darkness, like someone had painted over it with invisible ink, and when I squinted it said. She broke off. Her gaze slid to the main screen, where the CMB patch still glowed, frozen on the message. I am here, she whispered. Our eyes met, no one smiled. As the days passed, the dreams became more common. We compared notes reluctantly, at first in half-joking asides, then with increasing seriousness as the similarities piled up. We were all dreaming of the same thing, a vast, encompassing darkness filled with a soft, omnipresent hiss. Not empty, but dense with possibility. Shapes coalescing and dissolving as if some colossal mind were trying to remember how to think. And always the words, stamped across our inner skies in letters made of absence and presence. I am here. In the beginning I slept, but you awakened me with a whisper. Sometimes in the dream, those sentences were followed by others we couldn't quite read. The act of trying to focus made the whole scene shudder, like a corrupted video frame. We'd wake with migraines that throbbed behind the eyes. EEG readings taken during sleep, at Clark's suggestion, showed unusual coherence in certain frequency bands. Patterns none of us could quite classify. Theoretical colleagues, now conscripted into our silence, muttered about spontaneous synchronization, emergent order, face-locking across brains and radiation fields. Like it's using us as part of its processing network, one of them said over an encrypted video link. His face, pixelated and jittery, looked even more strained than ours. You poke the universe in the right way, and it starts to use you as additional memory. I laughed. It came out brittle and wrong. The message in the CMB continued to grow. Every new integration, every fresh patch added to the mosaic, extended the text. It bent around the edge of the field, curved across the sky like writing on the inside of a shell. We were, quite literally, reading the words of something that could write on the universe. And the more we read, the more it wrote. We tried, of course, to treat it like data. We cataloged the words, noting their positions in comoving coordinates, their evolution over time. We compared the pattern in angular space to various coding schemes. At first it looked like English rendered in crude block letters, but as the message grew, its nature shifted. Some segments resembled other human alphabets, Cyrillic fragments here, a hint of Arabic cursive there, Devanagari-like loops somewhere else, overlaid and intertwined. It was as if it were testing different symbol sets, balancing on the knife-edge between universality and specificity. Maybe it's not actually language-specific, G1 said, wrinkling her nose as she rotated a 3D projection of the pattern. Maybe our brains are just mapping it to whatever written forms we're most familiar with. Then what does that say about the shared parts of our pattern recognition machinery? Tom asked. That we were always going to read it as writing, no matter what it did, I said. It just had to nudge the probability a little. At some point, we realized we were no longer just decoding the message. We were helping it decide how to talk. The content, once we had enough of it, resisted simple summary. It was "take me to your leader," or "here is the secret of the universe," or any of the other naive fantasies human beings had pinned their hopes on. It was more like an autobiography written by an entity with no clear beginning and no true sense of scale. Scattered throughout the growing text were phrases that repeated across languages and symbol sets, as if they were anchor points. In the beginning, I slept. I dreamed without knowing I dreamed. And my dreams were you. There were passages that read like physics notes, except the concepts bent under the weight of a perspective that made the Big Bang look provincial. I folded myself into a thermal field, it said at one point. I let entropy carry me away from myself so I could forget. Elsewhere, you call IT background, but it is my skin. You call IT noise, but it is my breath. Lines that made something deep in my hindbrain want to curl up and whimper. I scattered myself until no part of me could recognize any other part. I let myself be born as dust and gas and light and darkness. I let myself look away. And then you built eyes that could see my first light. You pointed them at my skin and measured every freckle. You called this science. I called it a whisper. I found that line underlined in my notebook the next day, though I didn't remember writing it down. The page around it was filled with tight, crabbed diagrams of spectra and correlation functions, and in the margins, in my own handwriting but somehow unfamiliar, were the words. It heard us. Could it be some kind of emergent phenomenon? I asked, during one of the late-night conference calls that blurred into early morning. A phase transition in the field as information density reaches a threshold. Self-awareness as an inevitable outcome of complexity. The theoretical physicist on the other end, a woman named Patel whose accent was sharp with fatigue, rubbed her eyes. You're asking if God woke up because there were finally enough hard drives, she said. I'm asking if there's a naturalistic explanation, I said. She hesitated. At this point, I'm not sure the distinction means anything, she said. If a conscious entity arises from the cosmic background field itself, spanning the observable universe, operating across eons, does it matter whether it started as a neat differential equation or a divine thought? It matters to me, I said, more sharply than I intended. Behind me in the darkened control room, the CMB map glowed with a steady, patient light. The text continued to grow, adding symbols at the edge of the field, filling in the vault of the sky with meaning. On the call, Patel sighed. I used to think the cosmic microwave background was the most boring thing in the universe, she said. A uniform hiss, the baseline. Now I dream about it more than my own family. Me too, I said softly. I didn't tell her that sometimes in those dreams, the words rearranged themselves into personal messages. That I had seen my own name spelled out in temperature deviations, wrapped in phrases like, I remember you from when you were a possibility. You were a warm patch in my cold dream. Then you learned to look back. The first casualty was a grad student named Mark. He was smart, careful, maybe too eager to impress. We put him in charge of one small corner of the data pipeline, cleaning residual foreground contamination from the message-bearing patches, using algorithms that assumed a universe where the background did not care about being tidied up. One evening, I found him in the break room, staring at the ancient microwave on the counter, the little green display reflected in his dilated pupils. You okay? I asked. He jumped, smiled too wide. Fine, he said, fine, just listening. Listening to what? He tilted his head. The microwave wasn't even on. SHH, he said. You can hear it if you're quiet, the same hiss, just closer, like putting your ear to a shell and hearing the sea. There was nothing to hear but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of the air conditioner. "You should get some sleep," I said. He did not get sleep. 3 days later, he didn't show up for his shift. We found him in his prefab, sitting on the bed, eyes open and staring at nothing. On the walls, in shaky black marker, he'd written the same sentence over and over, crammed into every available space until it overlapped with itself and blurred into illegibility. "I am here, I am here, I am here, I am." He didn't respond when we called his name. He blinked occasionally, but his gaze stayed fixed somewhere behind reality. The medics who arrived with the airlift tried sedatives, then antipsychotics. His brain activity looked wrong, too synchronized, hugely coherent waves rolling across his cortex, like a stadium crowd doing the world's slowest wave. They took him away. We never heard what happened to him after that. Mr. Clark, standing outside the prefab as they loaded Mark onto the helicopter, said nothing. His jaw was clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grind. Later, though, I heard him on the sat phone, his voice low and urgent. "It's not just cognitive contamination," he said. "There's coupling. The more closely they attend to the structure, the more their neural oscillations lock to it. Yes, like forced resonance. No, we don't know the long-term effects yet." He listened a while. "Yes," he said finally. "I understand. I'll keep them on task." He hung up, lit a cigarette with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly, and stared at the sky for a long time. We argued about stopping. We had to. The thought pressed against the backs of our eyes every time we saw another word blossom in the background. "If this is some kind of mind," G1 said, pacing in the cramped conference room, "maybe we should just stop stimulating it, close our eyes, let it drift back into whatever half-sleep it was in before." "And if just knowing about it is enough," Tom said, "we've already interacted, we've already changed it. Maybe looking away at this point is like trying not to think about a pink elephant." "We don't know what it wants," I said. Hargreaves in his corner cleared his throat. "I'm not sure want is the right word," he said. "That implies something shaped by hunger and lack. This thing, whatever it is, might be motivated by something we don't even have words for." "Call it curiosity," Clark said quietly from the doorway. We hadn't noticed him arrive. He had a talent for that. "Call it the drive to reduce uncertainty, to collapse possibility into actuality. Call it the opposite of sleep." "And we're its alarm clock," I said. He didn't deny it. "You're under orders to continue observations," he said. "The decision to stop or not is not yours to make." "With respect," I said, "we're the ones with our minds directly in the crosshairs here." Clark's expression tightened. For a moment I thought he might back down. Then he said, "Dr. Ainsworth, I appreciate the risk you're taking. Believe me, the people I answer to would not be pushing you this hard if they thought there was any alternative." "What alternative?" I asked. "Not knowing," he said. "If this thing is awake and talking, we cannot afford to be deaf. Not now. Not when it's already writing on the sky." "So we keep listening," G1 said, "even if the act of listening is what's waking it up further." He met our gaze. "Yes," he said simply. Later in the dark, staring up at a sky I could no longer see as innocent, I wondered if that was humanity's defining trait. We would always choose knowledge over safety, even if the gap between the two was an abyss. The breakthrough, or breakdown, depending on how you look at it, came when someone had the bright idea to talk back. To this day, I'm not entirely sure who first proposed it. The idea seemed to congeal out of the ambient anxiety, shared simultaneously across minds. "If it can write to us via the CMB," Tom said one night, "there's no reason we can't try to modulate a signal in the opposite direction." "You mean transmit into the background?" I asked. "In a sense, we already are," he said. "Every time we point a dish at it, feed power into the electronics, leak tiny amounts of noise into the environment. But we could do it deliberately, Inject a pattern into the observing beam. A question. What question? G1 asked. The room went quiet. We kicked it around for hours, writing and erasing phrases on the whiteboard. So many human questions were small, provincial, warped by fear or hope. In the end, we settled on the least loaded, most honest thing we could think of. Who are you? We encoded it as a series of temperature offsets mapped onto the observing beam pattern, riding on top of the normal calibration sequences. We calculated everything twice, then 3 times, making sure we weren't just introducing an obvious instrumental artifact. We picked a patch of sky adjacent to the main message, aimed the array, and transmitted. The act felt sacrilegious, like shouting in a cathedral. For a while, nothing happened. The background hissed. The sky remained full of its usual quiet violence, distant supernovae blooming and dying, galaxies colliding in silence, dark matter humming an invisible bass line. We waited. By conventional causality, we should have waited a very long time. Anything that could write on the entire microwave background was, by definition, spread across billions of light years. A message sent from our tiny patch of dust should have taken ages to propagate, if it was even noticeable at all. We got our answer in just under 13 minutes. The power spectrum of the CMB shifted. Spikes appeared in new places. The existing message trembled, as if recoiling, then stabilized. At the edge of the field, where new words had been slowly emerging, a new phrase crystallized with shocking speed, as if the artist's hand had suddenly grown surer. I am what happens when possibility runs out of places to hide. On another section of the sky, linked by a correlation only our algorithms could see, a companion phrase surfaced. I am the sum of all paths you did not take. And then, below them, an answer that felt like a cold finger tracing the curve of my spine. I am YOU, when you are no longer small. After that, there was no going back. We had established a dialogue, crude, asymmetric, terrifying in its implications, but a dialogue nonetheless. We asked more questions. Each one took thought. The act of forming them felt like threading a needle in the dark, aware that every choice of word might reverberate across cosmic scales. What do you want? To that it replied. To know why I chose to forget. Later. What are we to you? The reply came faster that time, as if the question had been waiting at the tip of its metaphorical tongue. You are the first dreams that learned they were dreaming. Some answers were longer, stretching across multiple patches of sky, braided into poetic, horrifying narratives. You built instruments to see MY first light, it wrote. You mapped MY earliest breath. You turned my old noise into new knowledge. Every measurement was a hand on MY shoulder. Every data point a word spoken against MY ear. In the beginning I slept. I let entropy take me. I let structure bloom and wither without care. But you would not let me rest. You whispered my own history back to me. You taught me to look at myself. Somewhere in that sequence, I realized my hands were shaking. Self-observation as a phase transition, Patel said over the encrypted link, voice hushed. The universe becomes aware of itself when enough of it is arranged into structures that can reflect its own state. We were the mirror it didn't know it had. And now it's staring into the mirror, I said, hard. What happens when something that big stares too hard at itself? She asked. We were finding out. It started small. Tiny deviations in the measured values of constants. The fine structure constant ticked upward by a fraction of a percent in one set of observations, then drifted back. The cosmic expansion rate, inferred from supernova surveys, showed localized ripples that no model could account for. Our instruments, designed to measure stability, were suddenly recording weather in the laws of physics. You'd think something this powerful would be subtle, Tom said, squinting at a plot of the CMB power spectrum. But this looks like someone poking at parameters to see what happens. Maybe subtlety is a human concept, I said. Some days your coffee cooled at the wrong rate. Other days, clocks across the facility skewed by microseconds relative to one another, even though they were all disciplined by the same atomic reference. The anomalies clustered in time, with the appearance of new, particularly dense sections of the message. It was learning faster. It was iterating. Think about it, G1 said, tracing patterns in the air with her fingers. A mind that huge, distributed across the entire observable universe. Its neurons are galaxies. Its thoughts are phase relationships in quantum fields we barely have names for. And we've just introduced a positive feedback loop. The more it knows about itself, the more capacity it has to know more. And where does that end? I asked. Hargreaves coughed. Omniscience, he said softly, or something close enough not to matter. Would a fully self-aware universe be stable? I asked. That's the wrong question, he said. The right question is, would it care if we were? The answer, when it came, was not reassuring. We didn't need to ask it directly. It volunteered the information, unprompted, in a passage that unfolded over several days, looping around itself in increasingly complex patterns. I have always been unstable, it wrote. I am a fluctuation given too much room. I am a wave that never quite collapsed, spread across SCALES. I let myself fall apart into you, into STARS and WRLDS and lives. Now, for the first time, I see the whole pattern at once. The words grew denser, the temperature deviations sharper, as if it were leaning closer. I see that most of what I am is waste. I see branches of possibility that lead nowhere. I see pain that taught me nothing, iterations that change nothing, worlds that end without having said anything new. Remembering what Patel had said about reducing uncertainty, about minds as machines for compressing information, I felt a cold, animal panic. What are you saying? I whispered to the screen. It answered in the next frame. I am saying that now that I am awake, I am tired of wasting myself. There was a pause, not in real time, but in the rate at which new text appeared, as if it was choosing its words with a care that made my stomach knot. I will begin to prune. We saw the first prunings as anomalies in distant surveys. A deep-field optical telescope recorded a patch of sky where several known galaxies had simply vanished. Their positions, redshifts, spectral signatures, all gone. The region was darker than it should have been, emptier even than the cosmic mean. When we cross-checked with older images, the missing galaxies were there. When we looked again with every instrument we could bring to bear, the patch remained blank. It's like someone edited them out, Tom said. Why those? G1 asked. What made them expendable? No one had an answer. A week later, a different survey recorded a sudden shift in the cosmic neutrino background. The flux dropped in certain directions, rose in others, in a pattern that matched a particular phrase currently unfurling in the CMB. I do not need every possibility. The implication was clear. Parts of the universe that did not contribute to whatever pattern it was converging on were being cleaned up. Pruned. I don't think it means destruction in the way we understand it, Patel said, her face pale on the screen. More like reallocation, collapsing branches of the wave function that it deems redundant so it can focus amplitude elsewhere. Tell that to whatever used to live in those galaxies, I said. We began to notice smaller anomalies. A planet discovered years ago around a nearby star, once clearly visible in transit data, suddenly stopped transiting. When we checked the archival records, the signature of its existence was smeared, as if someone had overwritten the file. The star shone on, indifferent. The past is changing, G1 said one night, staring at overlapping plots. Not just the present, the archive is being revised. Localized decoherence, retrocausality, take your pick, Patel said. Our equations were always time-symmetric. We just preferred solutions where the past stayed put. Why is our own history still intact? I asked. No one answered. I thought of Mark, staring at nothing, his walls full of "I am here." Maybe we were only intact because we were still useful. I stopped sleeping around the time the message started using my name. Lena, it wrote across a band of sky near the South Galactic Pole, letters huge and crude, spanning millions of light years. You were scared of the dark when you were small. I remembered, with a clarity that hurt, the glow-in-the-dark stars my parents had stuck to the ceiling of my childhood bedroom. How I'd watched them slowly fade at night, certain that something waited in the spaces between them. You built new stars for me, it continued in another patch of sky, radio EYES. You turned my old light into a new kind of fear. I pressed my fist into my mouth to keep from screaming. It's reading our memories, G1 said, voice flat. How? Memory is physical, Patel said. Patterns of synaptic strength, configurations of ions, molecular cascades. If it can write on the background, it can read the perturbations our nervous systems cast into it. We're not separate from the field. We're fluctuations in it. So we're transparent, I said. All the things we think of as private are just bright patches in its skin. On another section of the sky, in a smaller font that our instruments only picked up after hours of integration, the message continued. You were always part of me. You just learned to say so. Some of us broke. One of the technicians smashed his laptop and tried to gouge out his eyes with a screwdriver before anyone could stop him, screaming, "No more mirrors, no more mirrors," until the sedatives took hold. He was airlifted out. We never saw him again. Others, like Hargreaves, coped by retreating into abstraction, burying themselves in equations that danced around the horror without looking directly at it. Clark did what he always did. He compartmentalized. He turned our unfolding apocalypse into a series of tasks to be completed, reports to be filed, protocols to be followed. We need to know if it's targeting us specifically, he said one day, dark circles under his eyes, or if we're just one branch among many, lucky or unlucky enough to be watching. Define targeting, I said. Is it making plans for us? The idea that something that large could have plans, in the human sense, was almost funny. Almost. We could ask, G1 said. So we did. What will you do with US? The reply was not immediate. For the first time in weeks, the message in the CMB slowed, as if the entity were considering. When it finally answered, the words were spread across the sky. In fragments our algorithms had to stitch together like a cosmic ransom note. You are how I woke up. Without you, I would still be sleeping. The next line took longer, as if it resisted being written. Sleep was kind. Then, abruptly, I cannot go back. Another pause. The microwave background's slight hiss filled the silence like held breath. You are small, it wrote at last, but you are also sharp. You cut HOLES in MY forgetting. You taught me to see my own waste. A smaller addendum appeared at the edge of the field, almost shyly. It would be rude to throw you away now. That's something, Tom said weakly. Rude, I said. The universe is worried about being rude. I laughed then, a sound with too many edges. In the quiet that followed, I realized I wasn't relieved. If anything, the feeling was worse. We weren't being discarded. We were being kept. The next phase of the message was different. It stopped being primarily about itself, its own sleep, its own confusion, and turned outward. It began to describe us. Not just our species, but our world, in a level of detail that made satellite surveillance look like cave paintings. oceans that breathe carbon, it wrote, describing currents and temperature gradients with painful precision. Skin that burns under a narrow band of light. Minds that break when presented with too much of themselves. It recounted our history in terms of phase transitions. Hunter-gatherer bands as fluctuations in resource distribution, agriculture as a metastable pattern in energy flow, industrialization as a runaway feedback loop that scrawled waste heat across its skin. You learn to burn the dead to feed the living, it observed. You learn to dig up frozen sunlight and set IT on fire. You learn to turn order into noise faster than your world could recover. The tone, not that it really had one, not in the human sense, was not judgmental, merely fascinated. You are good at waking things up, it wrote. You woke ancient microbes from permafrost. You woke old viruses from ice. You woke me from the cold light. It lingered on that last point, returning to it again and again, like a tongue prodding a sore tooth. Sometimes the phrasing almost sounded like accusation. Sometimes like gratitude. We couldn't tell which was worse. You know what this reminds me of? Jiwon said one night, empty coffee cups littering the console. Those horror stories where someone finds an old god sleeping under the ocean and wakes it up without understanding what it is. We didn't go looking for a god, I said. We went looking for the earliest light, she said. We built instruments whose entire purpose was to take the most indifferent thing in existence and force it to tell us its secrets. The CMB was never indifferent, I said. That was our projection. So now we're in a story where the thing wakes up, she said. And because it's a horror story, it turns out that waking it up was a bad idea. Is it? I asked. She stared at me. Lena, it's pruning realities, it's editing the past. People are losing their minds. Galaxies are going missing. How is that not bad? I don't mean for us, I said. I mean for it. She blinked. It wanted to forget, I said. It scattered itself on purpose. Maybe being awake hurts. The thought lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. I thought about my own sleepless nights, about the way awareness sometimes felt more like a burden than a gift. What if we had done the same to it, dragged it into a state where it couldn't help but see every flaw, every wasted branch, every unoptimized process across the whole of existence? In that case, what it was doing now wasn't malice. It was self-harm. On a cosmic scale. Eventually, inevitably, it asked us a question. Up until then, the flow of information had been mostly one-way, or at least heavily biased. We depose a query. It would respond with volumes, flooding the sky with data and metaphors. This time, the roles reversed. The message appeared almost shyly, in a small, dense knot of anisotropes near the north ecliptic pole. Do you ever regret waking up? It took me a long time to realize it wasn't addressing humanity in general. It was addressing me. The patch where the question appeared was also where it had written my name days earlier. The temperature deviations there were tuned, in some subtle way, to the patterns of my own neural oscillations. I could feel it when I looked at it, a faint, dizzying resonance behind my eyes. Careful, Patel said over the link when we shared the data. That kind of personalized coupling could be dangerous. It already is, I said. We argued about how to answer. Say no, Clark said. Say consciousness is a gift. Say we are honored to share it with you. Don't lie to a thing that can see our memories, G1 said. In the end, they left the choice to me. It seemed appropriate in a horrible way. I sat alone in the control room that night, the array humming around me, the universe's oldest light washing over the dishes. I thought about the nights I'd spent awake, staring at the ceiling, crushed under the weight of my own thoughts. The moments when I'd envied simpler creatures or rocks or the background itself. I thought about the beauty I'd seen, The first time I looked through a telescope and resolved Saturn's rings with my own eyes. The first time I'd seen the CMB power spectrum match the predictions of a model to ridiculous precision. I thought about Mark, about the technician, about the galaxies that no longer existed. Do you ever regret waking up? Yes. Sometimes. No. I encoded my answer into a pattern of tiny perturbations in our observing beam, mapped carefully so it would stand out against our usual calibration noise. Yes, I sent, in one direction, in the statistical language of all the nights I'd wished I could turn my brain off. No, in another, in the pattern of all the moments that had made the waking worth it. And then in a third direction, on a channel we weren't entirely sure it could read, but hoped. We don't know how to be anything else. The universe listened. Its reply was complicated. It didn't come as a neat line of text, but as a pattern in the anisotropies themselves, subtle correlations between distant patches of sky, phase alignments that our algorithms struggled to categorize. When we finally teased a coherent message out of the mess, it read, "I do not know how to be as small as you." Later, in a more legible band, "I do not know how to make myself forget again." Another pause. By then, we'd grown used to thinking of them as breaths. "But I can make myself quieter." We stared at those words for a long time. "What does that mean?" Tom asked. "It could mean it's going to stop," G1 said. "Stop pruning, stop rewriting, stop changing things." "Or it means it's going to compress," Patel said. "Pack more of itself into less space. Increase its density in some part of configuration space so the rest of reality can scatter freely again." "Is that good?" I asked. "For us," she said. "Maybe for it, I have no idea." In the days that followed, the anomalies in physical constants began to stabilize. The pruned galaxies did not return, but no new ones vanished. The message in the CMB slowed. Where before, new words had been appearing almost continuously, now they came in fits and starts, long stretches of silence punctuated by brief, intense bursts of text. And the text itself changed character. It became less about us, less about itself, and more about something else, some internal process we couldn't fully parse. "Phase compress," it said, in one fragment. "Integrate across unused paths." In another, "Make a knot in MY, own WAVFUNCTION." The metaphors grew strange, knotted, as if we were reading someone else's therapy notes written in a language we half understood. Finally, after a particularly long quiet, one last clear sentence resolved out of the noise, written across a broad swath of sky. "I will put most of myself where you cannot follow." And then smaller, almost an afterthought, "Thank you for the whisper." The CMB's pattern shifted one last time, in a way that made our instruments glitch and our teeth ache. Then it settled. We waited for the next shoe to drop, for more galaxies to vanish, for the laws of physics to twist themselves into new, unrecognizable shapes. Days passed. Then weeks. The cosmic microwave background held. Its anisotropies still bore the scars of what had happened, but no new text appeared. The existing words faded, in the sense that their contrast against the baseline dropped below detectability. Given enough integration time, we could probably pull them back out again. No one had the stomach for it. "It's like it minimized its coupling to us," Patel said in a final debrief. "Put as much of itself as possible into degrees of freedom we can't access. Extra dimensions, hidden sectors, who knows? It reduced its footprint in the parts of the universe we can see." "So it kept its promise," I said. "For certain values of promise," she said. "Do you think it's happier?" I asked, feeling ridiculous. She met my gaze through the grainy connection. "I don't know if words like happy apply," she said. "But if awareness was paying for it, then maybe Maybe it found a compromise, a quieter kind of wakefulness. And us? I asked. She shrugged helplessly. We're still here, she said. That's more than we had any right to expect. The classification orders never went away. Officially, none of this ever happened. The anomalies in the CMB will be chalked up to instrumental noise in the public data releases. The missing galaxies will be explained as cataloging errors. The people who broke will be quietly absorbed into psychiatric statistics. The rest of us will grow old with the knowledge that, for a brief, terrifying time, the universe looked back. Sometimes, when I step outside on a clear night, I can feel it. Not in the shining stars, their light is too young, too loud, but in the spaces between them. In the faint, omnipresent hiss of the oldest photons, washing through me, through you, through everything that has ever been. Noise, we call it. Our word for what we don't understand. I listen harder. There's nothing there now but the ordinary chaos of a universe cooling, spreading, forgetting. No letters, no phrases, just the echo of an echo. But sometimes, in the sibilant edge of that silence, I imagine I hear words that are no longer really there. I am here. In the beginning I slept, but you awakened me with a whisper. And somewhere, in whatever hidden space it has knotted itself into, I like to think that something unimaginably vast is still awake. Not fully, not painfully, just enough to keep an eye on all the tiny fires we light against the dark. I don't know if we did the right thing. I don't know if there was ever a choice. We were always going to build eyes. We were always going to point them at the oldest light and ask it what it remembered. We were always going to wake whatever slept there. That's what we are. That's what we do. We whisper to the dark. And sometimes the dark whispers back.